Hello everyone. In this video, I want to take some simple real-world problems and then let's convert those into a Python program. So this is going to look at maybe some of the strategy and techniques you can use to take a problem and convert it into something that can be described by a computer program. To begin with, let's bring over the output. Let's bring that over. There we go. So here's a description of a problem. This one, we don't really need to do this anymore. Back in the old days, our cars did not know how to compute their own gas mileage. So if you wanted to keep up with it, you had to do it by recording some information into a logbook and then doing a hand calculation. But the idea here, it'll work just fine for the purposes of this example because it's a simple problem. All right, so the description then I have here, let's read it. Before cars could calculate the gas mileage, we had to do it. So we had a logbook, and whenever we recorded or whenever we stopped to get gas, we would record the odometer reading and the amount of gas. Then we would drive until we needed to fill up the tank again, and we would stop and we would look at the old mileage and record the current mileage to determine how far did we drive since the last time we filled up. Then by knowing that distance and how many gallons, then we could calculate the mileage. So that's what this little problem is. Now, whenever you're looking at a problem and you're wanting to convert it into a computer program, then there are some certain things that you need to know. And this kind of falls back really under algebra. You might have remembered some of these steps from algebra. The first thing you need to do is you need to be able to understand the problem. Now, I think in these problems, it's pretty easy to understand what we're trying to do. But once you've understood the problem, then you need to try to figure out what are the variables that my program will need. In other words, what are the inputs that my program is going to need in order to do the calculation, and what is the calculation, and then finally, what is the output? Okay, so we need to know those things. So once you understand the problem, step number one is to identify the variables. That is, identify the things that are going to be input into the program. Then, once you've done that, then we can write the calculations in order to do the calculation that we need. And then the next thing we need to do is to output the results. We can't see the answer until we write it out to some device, and in this case, we're going to write it to the screen. Now, for this example, we just need three things. We need the odometer reading. Suppose we've stopped at our gas station, so we want to get our current odometer reading. That's how many miles that we have showing up on the car. Then we'll go check our logbook, and we will get the reading the last time we filled up. Now, since we've driven a certain distance since that last fill up, then that last reading is going to be less than our current reading. Okay, so the current odometer reading will be more than the last one. So we've driven, a certain number of miles. And I've got something appearing on my screen I'd like to get rid of. Okay, let's make that go away. Then, in order to do the calculation, we need to know how many gallons of gas. So those are three variables that we're going to need. We're going to calculate the miles per gallon. So we also need a variable for that. So we'll need a variable for the miles per gallon, and we'll need these three things: the gallons, the last odometer reading, and the current odometer reading. So those are the things that we're going to need. Now, let's take that information and let's convert it into a Python program. Now, with Python, you don't explicitly have to declare the variables, but I want to show you how we can do that anyway. It's always a good idea to do that. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to paste in the first step of what we're doing here. So in this program, we're calculating the gas mileage. So I recognized I need these variables: the odometer now, the current reading, the odometer the last time we filled up, and how many gallons. So I know I need those variables. So it's good programming practice to go ahead and identify those variables and set them to 0 before we do anything else. Now, I'll demonstrate shortly that Python does not require you to do that. However, most programming languages do. In all languages that are what we call a strongly typed language, then you are required to come up with your variables and give them a type. In this case, we're not giving them a type. We're just identifying some names for them. Okay, so things, programming languages like C and C++, Fortran, and Java, all those are strongly typed languages. So we would have to set the variables and give them a type before we proceeded. But hey, we are using Python here. So this will identify then the variables that we're going to use, and then we need to read those in. Okay, so we need to import that information. So let's put a comment here for step number 2, and I'll just put that down here. And this says that step number 2, we need to get the data into the program. All right, so we need to have some mechanism so we can type in the data, or we could read it from a file if it happens to be a great deal of data. So in this case, we're just going to type it in. So in Python, we use our input statement to do that. So let's put the first one here. Now, notice the input statement just says we have input, and then you have in parentheses a statement that you want to print out on the screen. So this just indicates that enter the current odometer reading. That's going to appear on the screen. And the input statement is going to accept whatever number we type in for that. Since this is going to be a calculation, we cannot calculate with a string type. A string type is what the default type would be. So a string, again, it's like a word, a sentence, or something like that. So we don't want this number we type in to be interpreted as a string. So we need to convert it to an integer. All right, so notice that syntax. We embed this input statement inside another set of parentheses, and then we use the int to convert that to an integer. Now, once that's all converted, we will save it in this assignment statement into the variable odometer now. So this program is going to have some communication between itself and us. So it'll ask us for an input, and we'll type it in. Then it'll ask us for another input. So let's put the second input statement out here in the program. Let's paste that in. And in this case, we are going to prompt our user, which is ourself, to enter the odometer reading from the last time we filled up. Okay, so that's not this time, but the last time we had to fill up, we had to record that number. Now we want to type that number in. We'll save it in variable odometer last. We need one more thing. Okay, we need to know how many gallons of gas did we just buy. So we need to prompt for that. So let's paste that in here. And this time, I want that to be a float. The reason is, in order to be accurate, I might put in 18.5 gallons or 18.6 gallons. And I'd like to get that fractional part included in my input. So the message to the screen will be, how many gallons of gas did you buy? Then we will type in a number. It'll be converted to a float, which is a real number. Then it'll be saved over here in gallons. Now, I didn't have to do these 3 up here. I could have left those out and just defined my 3 variables along with these input statements. Okay, Python will let me do that. Okay, so we'll demonstrate that coming up. Now that we have the inputs, we need to do the actual calculation. Okay, so let's put a message here that's for step number 3 that we need to do a calculation. Okay, so these are the steps that you should think about when you're developing a program. Okay, you've got to identify the variables. You have to import the data from somewhere, from the keyboard or from a file. Typically, we'll have to do a calculation, and then finally we output the result. So now let's do this calculation. Okay, so let me paste the line of code in here that does that. And here it is. Now, I've got another variable called mpg here. Okay, that stands for miles per gallon, but I didn't declare it up here anywhere. So again, Python will let me do that. Python will say, okay, here's a new variable, and you want to put this information in that variable. I'll let you do that, even though you didn't tell me up top you were going to do that. Now let's look at the calculation. It's pretty simple. As I said, we have driven a certain number of miles. To determine how many miles, we take our current odometer reading, and let's suppose that's 24,500 miles. Then let's go look up our last odometer reading, and let's suppose that was 24,200 miles. So we would have driven 300. At any rate, we want that to be a positive number, so we need to make sure that we do subtract those in the correct order. The current mileage minus the previous mileage. So we'll get some number of miles. Then we'll just divide that by how many gallons we bought, and we'll save the answer here in the variable miles per gallon. So that does the calculation. The final thing we need is we just need to output our results. So we will now, I'll put that comment here so we can remember that. We want to output the results, and we have a print statement for that. So we can just print to the screen the output that we just calculated. And I'm going to make it a little bit fancy. I'm going to print out this string here first, okay? Your mileage is, and then I'm going to put a comma. Then I'm using the round function so that I don't get a lot of digits. I don't need a lot of digits to the right of the decimal. That wouldn't be correct. So I'm going to use the round function, and I'm going to round my miles per gallon answer to 2 digits to the right of the decimal. So that's what that statement does. Then afterwards, I'm going to add this other string, miles per gallon, period. So the output will be something like your mileage is 15.2 miles per gallon, or whatever it happens to be. So that is the little program. Now, let's run the program, and let's look at what we get. Okay, so I'll click Run, and we will get the output, and it pops up in a huge window here, so let me resize that, and I'll move it over, and here's the output. So here you can see the prompts that we're getting. So let's fit everything on the screen. Fit it on the screen. All right, so we are going to see this first prompt, enter the odometer reading. Okay, enter the current odometer reading. All right, well, my current odometer reading, let's say that's 25,500 miles. So I type that in. Now, what was the odometer reading the last time I filled up? So I made up 25,300, so I've driven 200 miles. Then, how much gas did I just buy? Well, I bought 12.3 gallons. So I'll type that in, and the answer I get is I get 16.26 miles per gallon. So that calculated my miles per gallon, and you see the format here. We get your mileage is, okay, that comes from the string, and then the round MPG2, that gives me this number, and then we follow that by this miles per gallon. Now, if I'm concerned about having an extra space in here, then I could go down here and I could take the space out between miles and the double quotes right there. But, that's not a big deal. So that worked just fine. Now, I wanted to show you that I don't really have to have these variables, so let's take them out temporarily. Okay, I'm just going to delete them. Now, Python lets me just define those variables here when I use them. So I'll run the program again, and you can see that we do get the same output. Okay, so now we're just getting our prompts to enter the data a second time, and I can't seem to keep that on the screen. So let's stop and so there they are. And we'll type in some different numbers this time. Okay, so let's suppose our mileage, let's do 30,000, something easy to remember. And then the last time we filled up, let's suppose that was 29,450. So we drove a long way. That's 550 miles. We should have gotten really good mileage on that one. And how many gallons did we buy? Well, the tank was almost empty, so I bought 22 and a half gallons. Enter, and you see then we still get the nice output here. So Python is very forgiving if we do not identify the variables at the top of the program. And that's just one of the advantages of Python. C, C++ would not let us do that. So there you go. So there's a pretty simple little example. And I do want to go back, and I want to put back those variables up here that I erased earlier. And if I were going to be complete with this, if I'm going to go part of the way, why not go completely all the way here? So I'm going to put the MPG variable up here as well, okay, miles per gallon, and I'll set that to 0. If you do this, then you will not ever have any problems with Python not recognizing some of the variables that appear lower down in your program, in the body of the program. And we'll see an example coming up where that will be important. One more time on this one, remember the steps. You have to understand the program. Then you need to identify the variables, step number 1. And whether or not you put them up here, it doesn't matter. You still need to know what the variables are. So then you'll use those variables to collect data that somebody will type in or that we get from a file. So step number 2, we have to initialize those variables by importing the data and giving those variables some values. You can't do the calculations until those variables have values. Step number 3, perform any calculations that need to be done. Okay, in this case, it's simple. Just need to calculate miles per gallon. And then finally, step number 4, we want to write out the results. And you should always try to do these in the correct order. You can't print out anything until you calculate something, and you can't calculate something until you have values for all your variables. So it's a pretty common sense approach that we want to take here. Now let's move on to another problem. This one is a bit more involved. Okay, now again, it's kind of a fictitious problem, and we want to calculate how many pounds we lost from the last triathlon that we ran. Well, I don't know about you, I don't run triathlons, but I do ride my bike a lot. But the problem here then is, if let's just take a look at it, okay? So here's a description, okay? There's a description of what we want to do. A triathlon consists of 3 exercises: running, biking, and swimming. Each exercise burns a certain number of calories per hour. This amount differs by person, but we're just going to take some average values for this, and we'll not consider that we are the competitive athletes that would burn off a whole lot of calories if they were serious about this. Now, here are some numbers that I came up with, and I did try to do this not just randomly, but I looked up some of these using a number. I mean, there are a lot of different calculators available that you can find to calculate these things. But here are some values that we'll use in this program. So let's suppose that if we are running at 6 miles an hour, then we're going to burn about 700 calories an hour. If we are biking and we're really pushing it, averaging about 15 miles an hour, then we get almost the same number of calories per hour as we do running. Okay, so that's about 600. And if you're swimming at a bit more leisurely rate, you don't have to really be pushing it here, but if you're swimming laps, then that's about 400 calories an hour. Okay, so again, that depends on the person and how much you're exerting, but we'll use those values. We're also going to use this number. Okay, so typically if we, about 3,500 calories equates to 1 pound of body weight. And again, that varies, but we're going to use that. So we want to use this information, and we want to calculate how much weight we lost if we're running a triathlon. What are the inputs that we need for this? Well, there are more than we had in the gas mileage example. So in order to calculate it, let's just go down to the formula first, and let's see what we need to calculate. All right, in order to determine how many pounds we lost, or fractions of a pound, then we need to take how many calories we get running per hour, and we need to multiply that by how long we ran. Then if we're also going to do some biking, we need to take the calories biking, multiply that by how long we were riding the bike. And then finally, we take the calories per hour swimming, and we multiply that by how long we were swimming. So that gives us a total number of calories we burned in all 3 of those exercises. We add that up, and we divide by 3,500 to get the answer. So you can see we have 6 variables here, or 6 things that could be variables. Analyzing this problem, what would we really want to input? So there are things that we can set as constant values, and there are things that we can input that will change with each person or each time that we do something. Now you can tell already that these things are not going to change. Okay, now unless we're trying to do this for different people at different times, but if we're just doing this for ourselves, then typically this amount of calories per hour is not going to change very much. So we don't need to input that every time. So these things, those can be constants. Okay, we can set them and give those numbers, 700, 600, 400. We can initialize those in the program, and we don't have to input them. It would be kind of annoying to have to input those over and over and over again as well if we're prompting on the screen, please enter the calories. We get kind of tired of doing that because it would be the same. What will change, though, is the time. Okay, so we need to enter the time that we ran in all three of those exercises. And then we'll be able to calculate how many pounds we lost down here. And then once we're done with that, we can print out the final result, which is the pounds that we lost. All right, so now let's take this problem and let's convert it to a Python program. All right, well, let's start with those constants. Okay, we need to identify the variables. Okay, so I'm going to just paste that in here. And I have a comment to that. Okay, so we're still going to follow the steps. We'll identify the variables, and this will be our triathlon example. So the calories running, I will make a variable called calories run, and I'll set it to 700. I'll make another variable, calories swim, I'll set that to 400. And I'll make another variable, calories bike, and I'll set that to 600. So those numbers came directly out of the problem definition. I want to calculate pounds lost, so I'm going to declare that up here and set it to 0. Later, I'll do a calculation that will change that value from 0 to whatever the real number is. Now, we need to import the information for the other variables, and that's going to be the time. And this is going to be kind of a mixture. I'm not going to actually put the variables up here for the time. So let's go ahead and add that in, and we'll put that in here. So it says perform the calculations. Well, I don't want to do that just yet. I got the wrong part of my program. I want to import the data. So I'll import the data second. Can't skip any steps. So now we need to input the data to set up the calculations. Okay, so the data that we enter is going to be the time. So I'm going to declare my variable here, time run and time bike and time swim, as we've been doing all along. Now, I know I'm getting repetitive, but I could have done that up here as well. I could have put those variables up here and set them to 0. So I didn't do that, but you can. Now, I want to enter, or I want a prompt to enter the time. Okay, enter the time running in minutes. And I want to convert that to a float. Okay, well, it could be an integer. We don't usually put in fractions of a minute, so we could have used an integer there. But in the end, I want to do a calculation that results in a real number, a floating number. So I'm just choosing to convert those inputs to a floating type value, a real number, before I save them over here in the variables. So our inputs will be enter the time in minutes for biking, and well, for running first. Okay, enter the time running in minutes, and then it'll ask us to type in the time running in for biking, the time biking in minutes, and then finally the time swimming in minutes. So again, we're having a conversation here. Our program is communicating with us to tell us to do something, and after each one of these, it will wait until we type in a value, and then it does the next one, and it waits for us to type something in, then it does the next one. All right? So we have a little conversation there with our program. Now, notice that I'm asking you to type in the time in minutes, but these up here are in hours. That's calories per hour, so we'll have to do some conversions for this. So let's do that. We want to now start to work on our calculations. That's step number 3. We have all we need, so we can start the calculations. So we'll perform the calculations. The first thing that I want to do is I have to convert from minutes to fractions of an hour. So if I put in 30 minutes running divided by 60, that's 0.5 hours. And if I bike 60 minutes, then I divide by 60, that gives me one full hour. So I'm converting so that I will be able to match my times with these calories per hour that are up here. So I need to do that first. Okay, now I can go ahead and code that formula that we saw earlier. Okay, so this pretty long formula right there. Okay, so now we're going to do the calculations. So that comes up next. So let's put the calculation in. And that's number 4. Well, number 3, we're still doing calculations. Number 4, we need to output the result, so we're not ready to output just yet. Okay, that's a pretty long line there. So let's see if I can get everything on screen. In Python, we can put a backslash, a forward, I think it's a backslash here, and then we can use that as a continuation to the next line. Okay, so if the line's too long, just put one of those there, and then you can finish out the rest of the statement on the next line. Now, I'm going to do this in 2 steps. First off, I'm going to calculate the total calories that was burned. So it's the calories running per hour. That's up there. Okay, times how long did we run? Then we'll add on the biking part of it. Okay, how many calories per hour times how much did we bike? How long? Then we went to the lake. We did the swim part of this. So we swam for a certain amount of time. And then, well, we have that many calories per hour, and we swam this amount of time. So this calculation will give us total number of calories. Then we divide that, and that's called calories burned. Okay, we save the answer in calories burned. Then we want to calculate pounds lost, and that's just the divide. We take the calories burned divided by 3,500, and that's the pounds lost. And then we only have to output the result. Okay, so now we have step number 4, and we will print out the result. Okay, number 4, output the results. I'm going to choose to output 2 things. I want to output the total calories burned, and I want to output the pounds lost rounded to 2 digits to the right of the decimal. Let's bring that up so we can see it better. So the output then will be you burned, say, 2,000 calories, whatever it was, and you lost so many pounds. So that's what the program does. Now, let's run the program and let's put in some data, and we will see how much weight we lost in this triathlon. Pyathlon? Well, okay, maybe we could do a Python triathlon. Okay, the time running in minutes, 45 minutes. Time biking, okay, I'm good on the bike, so actually I went for 70 minutes. I did an hour and 10 minutes, let's say. And then time swimming, I'm not a great swimmer, 20, so I'll type in that. All right, now, I burned 1,358.3333. I should have rounded that as well, but I burned that many calories, and I lost about 0.4 of a pound after all that. So there, the program works. Let's run it again. Let's put in some different values. So I can go back to my window over here. I click Run, and it pops up again, and now we can type in some different values. Okay, time running in minutes. Let's go. We only did, say, 30 minutes up here. Okay. Okay, so 30 minutes. Time biking, didn't have as much time today. We did 45. Time swimming, let's increase my time there to say 40 minutes. And this time I didn't burn as many calories. Okay, so then 1,066, and I lost 0.3 pounds. All right, so at any rate, now we have a calculator that calculates how many pounds that we lost from this triathlon. And once again, here are the steps. Okay, we need to, step number 0, we need to understand the program. Then we need to identify the variables, and we need to set them to values by importing data. Okay, now one more time, those didn't change, right? So the calories per hour, those don't change. So there's no need to type them in every time. We can just set them up internally for the program, and these are just called constants. But our inputs, now we type those in. Those will be changing a lot. Then we will do the calculations, and the calculations were a bit more involved this time. We had to convert minutes to hours, and then we used that down here. And finally, we got the pounds pounds lost, and we output that data. So there's another kind of a made-up example representing a hypothetical real-world problem that we've converted now to a Python program. Now, let's move on and do one more. This program is a bit more involved than the other two, and it's called Bagel Shop. Okay, now we are building this program in Python, and it would be better if we were actually making an app, to put on the phone so that we could type things in easily. Of course, there's an app for every coffee shop anyway, so we wouldn't have to make one But hey, if we're opening up our own bagel and coffee shop, then I guess we would. Regardless, let's take a look at this. Here's what we want to do. Let's suppose we have a little shop that sells drinks and bagels, and we want to allow our customers to order a certain number of everything we have to sell. Then we want to calculate what their cost would be so we can charge their credit card or accept their money. So here we go. Let's look at how we can do this one. Description. Suppose we have a bagel shop, sells bagels and it sells drinks, and we'll keep it small so that our program can be done pretty easily. And in this case, then, we are only going to sell four kinds of bagels. Okay, we have a plain one, a wheat, an onion, and a poppy seed. And we'll also have 4 different kinds of drinks. Okay, we'll have coffee, we have tea, we have some bottled water, and we have some juice. Now, the price for all of the bagels are $1.49 each. So it doesn't matter what kind of bagel you get. Each one's $1.49. The drinks will be a different price. The coffee is $1.79, so we're not selling lattes here, just as regular brewed coffee. The tea is $2.25. We have a juice, several juices to choose from for $3, and bottled water is $1, $1. Now, let's suppose our customer is selecting items from the menu. We want to calculate the total cost for the customer. So what do we need to know? Well, we need to know what they want. So we need to know how many bagels they want, and we need to know how many coffees, how many teas, how many juices, and how many waters they want. And some of those may be zero. It's maybe likely that they're not going to want all 4 drinks. So we're going to offer all 4, but some of them could be zero, and if we don't want any, we'll just put in a 0 for that. But either way, we have to input that information. Now, the calculations become a bit more involved as well. So we need to add up everything. So let's do it like this. Let's use a variable to get the cost of all the bagels. So we just take the number of bagels they want, and we multiply that by the price. Now, for the other things, the price will be different for each one. Okay, so to get the coffee, if a person wants 3 orders of coffee, then we'd have to have the price of the coffee times how many they want. And the same thing for the others. Okay, how many tea, how many juice, and then we multiply by the price. So we'll have to have quite a few variables to do that. Once we know the total cost, and we can calculate that here, we just take the cost of the bagels plus the cost of the coffees and plus the teas, plus the juice, plus the water. We add all that up to get the total cost here. And that's really a subtotal. Then we want to put on the tax. So we'll have the total plus the tax. So we have to add on the tax down here. And finally, we'll output the total cost of the order. So now this program's become quite a bit more involved, hasn't it? We have a lot more variables to consider. I would say we don't want to input these prices. Okay, so as in the case where we have number of calories burned per hour, this isn't going to change very often. If the cost changes, then we'd need to go in and change the program. But from customer to customer, those prices aren't going to change. So what we really need to input is how many of everything the person wants. So those will be our input variables. Now, let's go ahead and let's start writing our Python program for this. Do we understand the problem? Yeah, we understand it. So we will go on from there. All right, so we need to identify the variables. So let's put that in here. Step number 1, identify the variables. And I mentioned that the prices will not change. So let's set up variables for the price of everything. We have the price of the bagels, the price of the coffee, the tea, the juice, and the water, and the tax rate. Well, that's not going to change very often either. So all of these things are going to be constants. So I'm going to set the price of everything, and it will not change throughout the program. Now, I will need to input the information regarding the order that the person wants. So let's put that here. And we will import the data in our usual fashion. We'll use our input statement, and we will have prompts to the screen, and you can see what they are. Okay, how many bagels would you like? How many cups of coffee? How much tea do you want? How many juices? Okay, so we need to ask all those questions, and the answer may be 0. Okay, so we have to type in a 0 for that. I'm saving that number over here in these variables. So bagels is the number of bagels that the customer wants. Coffees, how many of those? Tea, how many of those? Juice and water, how many of those? So this will input all the data we need in order to do the calculations. Now, let's do the calculations next. Okay, we'll take some time to get that in, and didn't mean to do that. Okay, so let's try that one more time. And I'll drop that in here. So number 3, we're ready to do the calculations, and there are quite a few to do. It's easy to do the cost calculation for the bagels. Okay, they're all the same. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many. Then we would just take how many they want and multiply it by the price. That gives us the cost. Okay, price is set up there. It's a constant. There, that's the constant for bagels. Now we need to add up how many. We need to get the price of all those others. So let's calculate the cost of the drinks. So we can put that in here. Compute the cost of the drinks. It's a long equation because we have a different price for each one, but the total cost of the drinks is just going to be coffee. That's how many times the price of the coffee. Okay, plus the tea, how many of those times the price of the tea. And then I'm using this backslash to continue to the next line because it's a long calculation. So we have the juice times the price of the juice and the water times the price of the water. So we just multiply all that out, and we have the cost of the drinks. Then we need to get the subtotal, so we can add the cost of the bagels to the cost of the drinks. So let's put that in here. And our subtotal then will be this. We have the cost of the bagels and the cost of the drinks. Just add those together. And I have declared a couple of new variables here that I didn't put up at the top. Okay, so once again, Python lets us do that. So cost bagels, that's a new variable. Cost drinks, that's a new one. Subtotal, that's a new one. Then finally, we need to add on the tax to this, don't we? So we have to add the tax, so let's put that in here. So it goes down there. Okay, put a space, put a line between those. So now we have the tax. So tax I set up as I have the tax rate up there. But the variable tax I did not create until just now. So I'll take this subtotal and we'll multiply it by the tax rate. That gives us how much tax. And then finally the total would just be to take the subtotal, then add the tax, save it in variable total, and we are finished with the calculations. With all that done, we can now output the information. So let's do that. We want to do step number 4. We'll paste that in here. And here is what we have. Now, I'd like to print out not just a final number, but let's print out a little receipt kind of output here. So we know how many bagels. Okay, so we'll print out the word bagels, and we'll print out that cost. We calculated the cost of the bagels, and we'll do the same thing for the others, right? We have the drinks, so we'll print out a line for the drinks. We'll take our subtotal, and we'll print that out. And then finally, we'll print out the tax, and then finally the final total at the bottom. And I'm rounding all these up to 2 digits because dollars and cents only uses 2 digits. All right, so that's a much more involved program. We have lots of variables, but if you just follow the steps, then you can get it done. Now, I may be indicating that you know all of those steps in advance, and that's typically not true. In many cases, you would need to come back and make some changes to part of the code that you've already done. So it's not just a strictly top-to-bottom procedure that you follow. So don't be concerned if you don't think of all of the calculations when you get to the bottom of the program. You might realize, oh, gee, I didn't calculate the tax. Then you might have to come back up here and put that in. Okay, so it's not always top to bottom. All right, let's run the program and let's buy some bagels and some drinks. All right, so now I'll bring over the output window, and we need to input some information for this. All right, now you may have realized that I can't pick out what kind of bagel I want. All right, so that'll come up next. We'll do a second version of the program that has that in it. How many bagels would you like? I'll take 2, please. Okay, how many cups of coffee? I just need 1 cup of coffee. No tea, thank you. Okay, no juice. I will take a bottled water though, so I'll put that in. And look, we get the output. All right, so I wanted 2 bagels, so we have a nice listing for that. We have the price of those. Here are my drinks, and here's the subtotal. We put the tax and then the final total. So we print out a nice little, a grocery receipt kind of thing at the bottom. So there, that works. But you can probably tell at this point that there are improvements we could make to this, and I agree that there are improvements. But this video now is running on a bit long. We're approaching 40 minutes, so I don't want to continue with this video. So I'm going to stop this video. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to make some modification to this program to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So we'll do that next. So let's stop the video. Let's stop this video here.